We're going to be wrapping up with the final episode, which is going to be the live episode, and this is episode 10 right before that. I do want to make sure that we end the season with a real acknowledgement of the workers who have made this industry thrive. Hi everyone, welcome to the Power to the Flower podcast. I'm your host, Nairobi, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today about the labor rights movement in cannabis. Now, when we're talking about cannabis policy, it's really important that we don't forget the people who are making this industry work. The policy doesn't just work for the entrepreneurs. It's not just in justice with regards to one or two things where we determine is social equity, but also social equity is making sure that we're including the rights of workers who are making this industry thrive, especially when those workers are coming from Black and Brown communities or have been recruited as a means to satisfy a war on drugs requirement for some of these cannabis businesses. It's really important that we talk about this today because as it stands, the longest strike in cannabis history is occurring with two strikes ongoing, one in York, Pennsylvania, and the other in Michigan. Ann Arbor, Michigan is where some of the workers have unionized to be able to bring attention to the fact that their dispensary is not acknowledging their unionization efforts. The other strike in Pennsylvania is focusing on the need to satisfactorily meet some contract negotiations. However, as you can imagine, because cannabis is so convoluted on a policy level, things like labor rights don't always apply in the same way. And you might ask what I mean by that, but I'm going to explain it to you, especially with the nuances of a new president that's conservative and is more pro-business like Donald Trump. President Joe Biden had a lot of wins with the labor movement, or more specifically with labor unions, while he was president. Unfortunately for labor rights workers, President Donald Trump is not pro-labor. The National Labor Rights Board is actually made up of appointees that are appointed on a federal level. And some of those appointees come around during different times, but more specifically, there are new waves of appointees that happen when there's a change in leadership, specifically in presidential leadership. Ever since the Trump administration has taken into office, you can imagine there have been a lot of changes on the federal level. You can imagine that the ideology of this president and the previous president really do not align. And so that means that we're going to have more conservative appointees on all different realms of the federal government. And the National Labor Board is not exempt from that. Here are the implications to the cannabis industry's labor rights movement. People who are advocating for higher wages, people who want better pay, in general because of the economy. Maybe some people want more stability in their shifts and they want better healthcare benefits to be covered. All of these things are usually what unions may represent their members to be able to go against and advocate for that with regards to a corporation. What it'll look like is the workers in a dispensary will basically find ways to strike, and sometimes that may be with a picket. We want better pay, right? So those type of sign holding events are also ways that the cannabis industry workers can showcase publicly that they're in opposition. Exclusive brand workers in Ann Arbor, Michigan are the ones who walked off in August 28th of 2025, and they started to picket so that folks could understand and they could receive national attention. This is in efforts to get higher pay, higher wages. Exclusive brand workers walked out in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when they decided on August 28th that their contract negotiations or efforts to unionize were not being met or acknowledged by the brand exclusive brand industries. Those workers that walked out in opposition to the contract negotiations not being met were over in York, and they walked off on September 1st of 2025. These two incidents are isolated but very similar in vein. One is looking to get media attention and the other one is looking to just disrupt the business flow because their contract negotiations are not being met. And the disruption of business flow is effective because it does dwindle down money, and then the corporate arms or the corporations start to see that as like a, well, if we're looking at this as a PR sort of stunt and a PR perspective, it's not worth the amount of money that we're losing. So let's bring them back to the table and negotiate. Some others may not fully negotiate, but they may look at the situation and say, well, this is causing us some pain, maybe not for PR reasons, but because they are actually losing money. Now, what happens is that during unfair contract negotiations, you'll find that there's a seeking of a mutual understanding, but looking to get different parties involved. In some cases, this does lead up to a court case, and I'll explain this because it happened in Oregon. Gotham Dispensary in New York, for example, unionized 18-3 in favor of making sure that there was a union. Okay, so what that means is that they voted to become a part of a union, a part of United Food and Commercial Workers Union, or the local unions that I think are the retail dispensary unions. So folks who work in whatever type of faction, it could be in retail, commercial, and any food even. There's unions for different types of work. If I am a writer, there's writers unions, and there's different things like that. A news outlet, there's news unions or publication unions. So there are different types of ways that you can unionize, and this is called collective bargaining. So collective bargaining means that you are together deciding to come, and oppose one particular thing or maybe multiple things, but to collectively come together and bargain for better wages or better contracts, whatever the case may be. And while this is all happening, there are decisions and court rulings that may prompt a change or a shift in how cannabis workers can operate. Now, here's the thing. The kicker is that some of these dispensary owners understand that with the federal illegality, the businesses 10 times more likely have an upper hand in this administration than the workers do in this administration. The reason being, like I mentioned earlier, is that we have a conservative government right now in the federal government that is pro-business. And anytime that a business says that they're losing money, there may be some decisions that are more pro that business and opposing the workers who are looking to get higher and better wages. And so this translates into a skewed policy, right? Because now we're not looking at bringing power to the people or power even to the rights of the people. But now we're giving power to the corporations and deciding on rulings that are more pivotal. If the federal administration were to acknowledge cannabis, we may be in a different scenario. However, in Oregon, they were trying to install a law that would make it so that there were labor rights agreements. And these LRAs, the labor rights agreements, would have been forced into law had there not been a court ruling that opposed it, okay? And the labor rights agreement basically stated in Oregon, as it was proposed, was that corporations or cannabis companies must come into a labor right agreement or labor rights agreement with their workers in order to get their license renewed. But a federal district court ruled in favor of the companies, stating that because this was a potential violation of the of the First Amendment, meaning that they weren't able to basically voice their opinions without getting their licenses renewed or maybe oppose even their workers. It felt unfair to some people, and the court ruled in their favor. And some people, meaning the corporations, right? The businesses. And so what we have here is because the federal government doesn't acknowledge cannabis in the same way, the National Labor Rights Council may have decisions that may have longer lasting impacts on what it means to work in the cannabis industry. This is why this is super, super important, because if it states that states can't have labor rights agreements in order for a cannabis company to come into their renewal agreements in order to operate, it means that some people are left out of their leverage options. So even when states decide to be pro-cannabis workers, you still run into what's fair and what's not, and the court ultimately decides. But if these courts are ruled and appointed by conservative judges, then you now see that there is a little bit of a disconnect there with regards to labor rights. Okay, so while we're on this conversation, I want to point out two different things that are really important for us to know from this conversation. And so here we have it, the two things that are most important to talk about: wages and why it matters. Okay, so the wages in the cannabis industry tend to be much more higher than average. But the reason why this is so is because there are more safety measures to consider, and there are a lot of different complications that need to make it so that this industry is more appealing, as opposed to a person working, in McDonald's making $15 an hour. You can work on average maybe $18 an hour in a dispensary, get paid a little bit more, and have an incentive to work in the cannabis industry, though there is still stigma. And there has been health and safety concerns over the years, such as the cultivation facilities that can be impactful to the lungs if you have asthma. There have been people that have been known to have asthmatic symptoms while working in a cultivation facility or close to cannabis. And those adverse health impacts aren't really addressed through healthcare benefits, because people don't really receive healthcare benefits in the cannabis industry due to the higher wages as an offset, and also because a lot of the different complications with the federal illegality and people being covered for the work that they do, depending on the state that they work in. People who have had asthmatic symptoms in cannabis facilities have reported this to their employers, but in some cases they haven't been acknowledged or have been dismissed, because that's just the nature of cultivating, right? But in one case, there was a death in Massachusetts as a result of the asthmatic symptoms that this one worker was experiencing, and the cultivation facility and its, the high exposure to the cannabis dust and things like that got into her lungs from the cannabis facility. So that company, TrueLeaf, is no longer in Massachusetts, but they are a multi-state operator. So things to consider for workers, especially as we, the consumers are purchasing from these companies. We want to make sure that the workers are being treated right. Now on to the second point, why it matters. The reason why this matters is because we not only want for folks to have better and higher wages and healthcare benefits and negotiations that meet all of their potential lifelong, needs, such as like a retirement package, etc. The reason why this is so important for us to advocate and why it's important for us to talk about is because we are increasing a rise in economic burdens as a country in the general whole, right? We are experiencing a rise in grocery prices. We are experiencing a rise in general bills, such as utility bills, right? In Massachusetts, for example, the utility bills are literally going up and up statistically due to the mathematical equations, right? In Massachusetts, for example, we have our electric bills and our gas bills, the utility bills rising and increasing in how much we have to pay per month. And so that is becoming an issue and a burden all around. It's not just in Massachusetts. People are feeling this over the course of time and ever since the pandemic. So changes need to be made as we see that companies and workers are not given what they need in order to as we see that workers in these companies are not given what they need in order to have a successful life. You will see that a lot of these strikes will happen probably over the course of time if the increase in economic burden also persists. So it may look like a graph. Increase in economic burdens, increase in strikes. Okay, so the reason obviously is if people are not feeling like their money is making their ends meet, okay, then they will strike for higher wages if they feel like their employers are not listening to them for such an increase in wages. So that being said, we want to be advocating for and standing with our brothers and sisters who are in the labor movement, and also those who have not unionized yet, right? So there are different types of cannabis unions like the UFCW, like I mentioned, and they have local chapters all around depending on what type of locale. So if it's a retail or if it's a cultivation site or a processing site, it might have different sub or local unions. So just kind of keep that in mind. And if you're interested in unionizing, you should know about the terms called union busting. Union busting is a term that a corporation would act on, right? So a union buster is a person who is looking to stop workers from unionizing. Union busting is the act of corporations or peoples looking to stop unionization efforts. So you should know that, because there may be a union buster or what is called a scab, right? Those are just words that I have known throughout my years of organizing. And scabs tend to be in favor of the anti-unionization efforts. There are also anti-union consultants, people who are literally paid to consult these companies on how to stop the unionization efforts from their workers at any point, at any time. And those are union busters as well, but just the professional ones. We also have different types and forms, right? Such as policy efforts and taking it to court to legally challenge a unionization, activation. Maybe somebody's looking to strike, and then there's a company who's looking to stop that and files a court injunction because of whatever reason. Even though workers do have the right to strike, maybe because of the complications, due to the complications within the cannabis industry being federally illegal and having sort of that nuanced policy, some people will take it up to the courts and challenge it in whichever angle they can. However, we do need to know that these fights are worth it. And that is why we should continue to advocate on this particular issue and make sure that our fellow cannabis workers and industry leaders and professionals are being treated with respect and with dignity. This is a fight about dignity, a fight about respect, and a fight about living wages and the general well-being of the Massachusetts and the general well-being of labor workers. On that note, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that if you see an effort, you support the unions and do not cross into the dispensary. Are you listening? Do not cross the picket lines, okay? If you see that union workers are striking, regardless if it's in a dispensary or even in Walmart, for example, do what is the right thing and stand with the workers and don't support that business, because it also helps their bargaining efforts. By their collective bargaining and you not choosing to spend your money there, it also helps, and you are a part of that effort as well. So thank you to everyone, and good luck to those who are unionizing. We are going to see more of this and probably have more deeper conversations about what this looks like on season 4. Oh my gosh. Or no, sorry, in season 3. I can't believe we're almost at season 3, and I'm just so grateful for everyone who has been supporting the podcast for as long as we've been doing it. So thank you. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and to listen. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and listening to this podcast over the course of the whole season. Now we are heading into season 3 within the next couple of months. So stay tuned and listen to any past episodes that you may have missed. Any episodes that you may have missed in YouTube, you can still watch them. They're up there for you to watch. And if you're interested in coming to our live event, it will be Saturday, the 27th at 5:30 p.m. for a nice time and a live audience finale. So excited to see what happens. But thank you all for participating and being a part of this. Till next time. Bye.